Things are heating up in the Overwatch League, and Connor and I are here to recap the last week of games and make our weekly predictions on the best games of the upcoming week right here on our Overwatch Database weekly recap. We're going to jump right into the scores from the weekend. Starting off on Friday, we didn't see too much action there. A couple of 3-0s, the Dallas Fuel 3-0 over the London Spitfire, and the Los Angeles Gladiators 3-0 over Vancouver. Not really too much to extrapolate from those games. I think it was a really good showing from the Gladiators, and I think Vancouver, they struggled, but I thought Chongsik filled in pretty decently considering he just got on the roster after Shredlock retired. And then that evening or Saturday morning, whatever you want to call it, over in APAC, we saw the Shanghai Dragons 3-0 the Los Angeles Valiant, and the Seoul Dynasty beat New York Excelsior 3-1. Again, no surprising upsets there. Pretty standard results, I think, with kind of how this stage has gone. I thought maybe the New York Seoul game would be a little closer, but Seoul handled them pretty well. New York was probably a little more disappointing than I thought they were going to be. Over on the North America side of things, during the day on Saturday, we saw London again get 3-0'd, this time by Houston. We saw the San Francisco Shock beat the Toronto Defiant pretty handedly 3-1, and the Los Angeles Gladiators beat the Atlanta Reign in a very close 3-1 series. One of the closer 3-1 games, at least this year. A lot of really good things on both sides. I think the Atlanta Reign DPS and just the roster in general are really gelling and playing, kind of at their peak. They finished the stage 3-1 since they don't play any games this weekend. They already played their 4. And the Gladiators seem to be finally getting things going and the ball rolling, fixing a lot of the issues that were plaguing them early in the season. Like a lot of the coaching decisions. I like that they played Bird Ring the whole time, and they played Moth a lot more. Looking at APAC that night, we saw the New York Excelsior beat the Valiant 3-0. I actually regretted that one a lot. I predicted the Valiant to win. And then we saw the Shanghai Dragons beat the Dynasty 3-1. That was an interesting result. I think we saw Seoul really struggle and make a lot of the old, mistakes that they had before, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. And then to wrap things up on Sunday in North America, the Houston Outlaws, a very impressive 3-1 win over the Toronto Defiant, the Atlanta Reign 3-0'd Vancouver, and then the San Francisco Shock, in one of the weirder games I have ever seen, beat the Dallas Fuel by a score of 3-1. So unlike week 1 of the June Joust, there wasn't like the crazy amount of upsets, or really hardly any for that matter, but there was kind of a lot to extrapolate and we learned from this week. So we're going to talk about the Gladiators first here. And they really seem like they really are kind of getting the ball rolling. They're playing Bird Ring the entire time. They were playing Mirror on DPS early, I think, in the season. They stopped doing that, and they stopped subbing Skewed in over Moth so much. I think Skewed has been really good, especially on Brig, and I think he should be playing and seeing time for them. But I think he was playing too much. They played Moth a little more, and I think it had a lot better results. It seemed like they fixed some of the coaching issues. So I'm really excited for the Gladiators going forward. I know a lot of people still aren't talking about them as like a top 5 team, but I think they're getting to that point because we expected that going into the season, right? And then they struggled in stage 1, and then everybody just kind of forgot about them. But I think they're kind of getting it going now. I still don't fully trust it. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of DPay at coach, and I don't trust it fully yet, but they are moving in the right direction. Shifting gears to the San Francisco Shock, another team that was really impressive. I think that 3-win over Dallas really showed us that not only are the Shock still good, they are still elite, even if their DPS are not. And that's kind of the focus point I want to talk about, because even though the Shock won that game, they went 2-0 this week. They look like they're kind of back to being really elite. They do have issues. As great as this team still is, and they are a title contender still this year, I fully 100% believe that, their DPS is not what it was. I know they had Ons, and he just fragged last year, and he was arguably the best DPS in the entire league. Definitely the best hit scan. But still, I'm surprised that how bad Striker, Nero, and Glister has been. And they haven't played Tayo at all. So I have a lot of concerns about the DPS because it kind of feels like I don't even think they're a top 5 DPS lineup anymore. It really feels Smurf and Choyobin and Violet really carry this roster. Now, granted, the DPS played good this last weekend. Okay, they played really good. But other than that, they have been super inconsistent. And just because of 1 week, I'm not willing to give them the whole benefit of the doubt. And it's just kind of weird to think about, going back the last 2 years, they've been the best team in the world. They've had the best DPS in the world. So it's kind of weird to talk about them as not having even a top 5 DPS lineup, but they really don't. Teams that I can think of that have better DPS on their roster, just off the top of my head, Houston with Dante and Happy have played better, I think, this year than the trio of Striker, Glister, and Nero. For the Shock, I think Fleta and Lip has been better. I think Doa and Sparkle has been better for Dallas. I think you can make an argument Yaki and BQB are better. And think about this. I mean, I know earlier in the week they beat Toronto, but honestly, Aspire playing his first Overwatch League game ever, and Neist, who's been a pleasant surprise this year, granted, but Aspire and Neist outplayed the Shock DPS from the majority of that game, like 80% of that game. The tank line of Smurf and Choyobin and then Violet over on flex support carried the team. Like Aspire and Nice outplayed the DPS. So I think that is something that you can make an argument for. That I think you can even make an argument that with Pelican playing as well as he is now, him and Kai are probably actually just as good at least. So I feel like there's a lot of teams that are ahead of them in that department, and I think that's kind of a key thing to look at as the season progresses. And speaking of Toronto, transitioning to them, what were your initial thoughts on Aspire, Connor?
Honestly, he was amazing. Okay, that's all I really gotta say. He was amazing, constantly getting picks and really following up and supporting his team. And it seemed like the enemy teams could never really figure out what to do about him. And it was incredible that he was outperforming the Shock DPS. Like when he was playing Widow and Creed, just popping heads basically, and they didn't know what to do. It probably came out of nowhere to them. They probably thought the person Toronto subbed in for the COVID cases was going to be some just, average filler. But oh my god, someone signed this guy. He is amazing.
Yes.
I'll be surprised if he does not get picked up by a team this season at all.
He absolutely better get picked up. I really like the comment you made in our Power Rankings episode. And because I do want to talk about Toronto besides just Aspire. And you made a comment saying that after he would die in a fight, that they looked lost. They didn't know. Like, they didn't even look like they knew what they were doing. And I mentioned how I didn't even think it was, when he died. I just think, as a team, Toronto doesn't look like they even know what they're doing. He just clicks heads and wins them fights. But Toronto looks completely lost out there. I think we're realizing how much Sato was pocketed by the great players around him at Philadelphia last year, because Sato has not looked good. And really, for me, the roster is really good. They shouldn't be as bad as they are, sitting here at 4-4. I think it kind of comes down to coaching, and honestly, I was probably one of the highest people on KDG coming into the year. I like KDG a lot, but I don't think he's done a very good job with this roster. They just look lost, and they have so much talent. I mean, that roster really is pretty good. I think Sato has really, really struggled, and that's been a lot of it. I think if you upgrade at main tank, and it greatly improves his team, but they really are this year's gatekeeper team. They beat all the teams below them, cannot beat any of the teams ahead of them. That has absolutely been Toronto this year. And it really saddens me because I really think this roster has way more potential, but that's really what they are. They're kind of, this year's gatekeeper like Atlanta has been in the past. Before we get into our next segment, the final team I want to talk about from the weekend is the Seoul Dynasty. That team is broken. I don't really understand a lot of what they do. I know there's been a lot of talk that Gesture is kind of feeding and hasn't been very good this year. But look, I think a lot of that comes down to the coaching decisions. Okay, I've never been a fan of the coaches at Seoul, but what the hell are you doing? They are absolutely just wasting this roster again. First of all, we're going back to the Marvel off-tank garbage that they ran last year. They stopped doing that at the beginning of this year, and they looked way more consistent. Seoul looked really good, and I thought they had finally turned a corner, and now we're just doing it again. Why? Why are you doing that? It really upsets me because obviously, I'm a London Spitfire fan. Profit and Gesture are near and dear to my heart. Okay, they won a championship in the very first year of the Overwatch League in, London. So I want to see this team succeed, and it feels like the coaching is just absolutely horrendous. I don't know why you're running Marvel on off tank. And I think that creates a problem with Gesture because I think Gesture is super great, but only on specific comps and specific metas, in certain maps. So, in my opinion, why aren't you just running Marvel on main tank most of the time, Gesture on specific, like, Winston compositions on maps, and then just running 2U at off tank the whole time? Like, to me, I don't know, because when we did see that very briefly, like for a week or two at the beginning of the year, I thought it looked really good. Fitz and Profit have been really good. And I think the support line has actually been better than I thought it would be with Onimo and Creative. I'm still not like super high on Onimo, but I think Creative has been a nice surprise. But the whole decision being made around what they're running at tank, this roster is just broken, and I don't get it.
Now, a question for you, being a Spitfire fan. How do you think they would be performing if they still had Bird Ring on their team? Just in a general
If the Seoul
sense.
Dynasty still had Bird Ring?
No. London Spitfire still had Bird Ring.
Oh.
How do you think they would be performing?
Not that much better than they are, because I think
really
the tank and support line are the issues anyway.
Okay, yeah. I just thought I'd ask.
Hottie and Molfig have been bad. I think a lot of it's the coaching, but they've been bad. And don't even get me started on, like, Ripa. Like, yeah, it's bad. But yeah, maybe a little bit better. Actually, Bird Ring has been popping off this year. I think that he's been the most consistent he's ever been. and the Gladiators looking real good.
And that's why I would ask that, because I don't know if like maybe he would be able to carry them if he was still on their team, but I doubt it. But it was just a
I
question
don't think he's
thought
a
I would
true
ask.
carry like that, no. But that's a good question. I think that he never used to be this consistent. I remember when he was back on London, he had a lot of kind of inconsistencies. So usually that doesn't get better as the player gets older, but it has for him, which is great. I don't know what kind of clicked for him, but so next we're going to talk about the teams that are locked in for the June Joust. This next weekend of games is the last games for the qualifiers for the knockouts, which, by the way, just a reminder for everybody, games start Thursday this week. So from the time which this will be posted on Wednesday, the games are actually going to be on Thursday this week. And then we will have games on Friday and Saturday as well to decide the knockouts, which, just so everybody knows, like, are coming up on Sunday are the knockouts to decide the Hawaii teams for the June Joust. So that's coming right up. So we're going to talk about some of the teams that are locked in, kind of just because there's been some surprises. First of all, we'll start on the North America side of things. Atlanta Reign, 3-1. They're already confirmed in with a 3-1 record. I think a 3-1 record gets you in no matter what. Pretty surprising there, considering how their year started. And I was low on them, but they looked amazing this stage. I think they're a pretty big threat to beat almost anybody. It also probably just, depends on what side of the bracket they get put on. The Gladiators, they're not technically locked in, but for the sake of argument's sake, we're going to lock them in talking about it today because they're 2-0. They only need one win. They basically essentially just can't lose like both games next week, 0-3, and they're locked in, I think. And they play Boston and Paris. They're going to beat Paris, and they might beat Boston. So they're essentially locked in. And those are two teams from the last stage we didn't see in knockouts. So already they're very exciting. We're going to see two new teams. Another team 2-0, not technically quote-unquote locked in, but will be. The Boston Uprising. They play Paris and the Gladiators. Again, I think they'll probably beat Paris at least. We have the Houston Outlaws, who are locked in at 3-1. They were in it last stage, but we saw them get knocked out early. So it's going to be really interesting to see them and see if they can actually make a run this time, because you feel like they're got to be one of the favorites. And then the Shock are 2-0, so they're essentially just about wrapped up too. So we pretty much have 5 spots already locked in for NA, and there's only 6. So kind of some games to look at this weekend. The big one for me is Florida-Dallas, because those are two teams who are actually fighting for the last spot, and I think that winner of that game probably gets it. And one of those teams will not make the June Joust knockouts, and that's kind of crazy when you think about it, because those were the two teams that went to Hawaii from North America, last stage. So one of those teams will not make it, and actually technically neither of them could, because Paris is right there in the running too. So really interesting game. So those are kind of the teams to keep your eye on next week: Boston, Paris, Florida, Dallas. Then over on the APAC side of things, the Hangzhou Spark are 2-0. We're going to say they're locked in. They play the Valiant next week. They're gonna at least be 3-1. And then the Shanghai Dragons are 3-1. So those two teams are locked for the June Joust knockouts. And then the last 2 spots are really up for grabs. It could be Seoul, Guangzhou, or maybe even Philadelphia if they come out strong this week and get a couple 3-0s, which I think is possible. So really up for grabs for the last 2 spots on the East region side of things. And again, those will be played on Sunday this week after the regular season games.
By the way, you can get tickets to the East Region games, apparently, because there's a tickets button on the website right now.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, that's the thing I want to tell people, too. We have homestands this weekend. I can't believe I actually forgot about that. So on Saturday, in the middle of the night for us over here in America, but I think it's the middle of the day or evening there, they are actually doing a homestand for the Hangzhou Spark this weekend, Saturday night, 2 a.m. Pacific time. The Los Angeles Valiant will play the Philadelphia Fusion, the Guangzhou Charge will play the Seoul Dynasty, and the Chengdu Hunters will play the Hangzhou Spark at the Sparks homestand. So all 3 of those games getting played in a venue over there that night. Definitely people check that out. Like, if you just started watching Overwatch League, like in the last year or even this year, and you've never seen homestands, they're amazing. And we just haven't been able to have them because of COVID. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because yeah, you can buy tickets for that. I believe they're still available, and definitely check that out. And I believe they are going to be doing the knockouts for the APAC region at that same venue. So the knockout games will be live. So Hangzhou is probably going to qualify for that. So, I mean, that's going to be awesome. So we're going to throw in a little extra segment this week, kind of in the middle of our episode. We're going to actually talk about some of the best rookies this year, and we're going to do a rookie ranking. Just the top 5. Some honorable mentions that we don't have in our top 5. Assassin has been pretty good for Washington Justice. He's not going to make our top 5 list. Muse isn't going to make our top 5 list for the Gladiators. And the other one we really considered was Juby for the Outlaws. So those are like our 3 honorable mentions. Now, talking about it, at number 5, we decided to put Gaga, the main tank for the Chengdu Hunters. Look, he's been, he's not a hard carry. He's not one of the best tanks in the entire league, but the guy has been consistent as hell this year. And he's really flexible. He can play a pretty good range of tanks. I really love watching him play ball. But I thought when we saw them play Reinhardt, he played it really well. And it's just been a lot of fun watching this guy play. I mean, there's a lot of rookies on that team, but he is definitely my favorite. And I think he's become a fan favorite pretty quick, too. Again, he's not always making the huge plays, the flashy plays, but he is incredibly consistent. He kind of feels like Fate from last year's Florida Mayhem team to me, and just the consistency aspect of it. But he's a rookie, so that's who we have at number 5. At number 4 in our rookie ranking, we put Shy for the Hangzhou Spark. I almost didn't include him just because he's only played, 2 weeks, and he's played so little. But that was because of a coaching decision, and he has been just nutty on Ashe since they put him in. I mean, the guy absolutely pounds on the hit scan roll. Why he wasn't playing is mind-boggling. I'm glad that they made the coaching change and this guy is playing now because he's incredible to watch and he makes staying up for APAC even that much more, worth it. And then Connor, who do we have at number 3?
And at number 3, we have Piggy from the Houston Outlaws. So honestly, he's been doing amazing as a tank. And like I've said in our past number of videos, almost all the rookies from contenders that are coming into the league now are really good. Like, they are just keeping up with the players that have already been there. I mean, of course, contenders is basically close to Overwatch League in a way anyways. But they're keeping up really well, and I think that Piggy's tank is really helping the Outlaws right now. And I really want to see how his career goes on this team, and if he decides to stay on it or maybe move on to another team maybe. But I think he fits with the team really well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've been impressed with how he really only plays 3 heroes, okay? He only plays Sigma, Zarya, D.Va. But I've been impressed with how consistently good he is on all 3. I think he's been very good across the board, and he doesn't really have a lot of downs,
See, and that's another thing. Having a smaller hero pool, but not so small. It would be nice if you could play maybe 4, but 3 is just that right amount where you don't need to get used to too many different playstyles and character kits, and you can just stick to those few, and you'll be good. I think him only playing those 3 is the perfect amount for him to be able to consistently play well.
Yes, and that's exactly what he's been, is consistent. And I agree. I think that's been great. Number 2 in our rookie rankings, for so far in the season, we decided to put Pelican for the Atlanta Reign. I know that's kind of, at first I felt like maybe that was a bit of a hot take, but the guy has been really good. I think especially, the last few weeks. The beginning of the year, the team was struggling and he looked really meh, but I think he's looked better and better as the year's gone on. I really like watching this guy play Echo. I think it's extremely good, and I think he's fit in really nice with the roster.
Yeah, honestly, I think he's been doing Echo really well, and what I'm wondering is, since he also plays Tracer, how his Tracer would have been during this stage if Tracer wasn't banned against all the Echoes and D.Vas we are seeing if he decided to run Tracer. Because I know you can get a lot of ult charge off of D.Vas, but will you get any value out of playing Tracer against something like that? That's something I really would have, wanted to see at least.
We'll see his Tracer next stage, too. I really think we'll probably see that a lot, as well as some of the other stuff he can play.
And for the number 1 slot, it is another Outlaws player. It is Jengu. Okay, we chose both these tanks because their tank line right now is amazing. They work so well together, and I think their tank line right now is perfect. They're constantly working together really well. There's no collision between the players. And he plays a lot of Ryan, Winston, and Wrecking Ball. And I gotta say, last stage, when I was watching the games at least, because I missed a couple of them, when I saw his Winston, he was diving every possible person he can while still protecting his team with bubbles and stuff too, and just destroying teams and using Primal at the perfect times, and I think he works really well with Piggy's tank as well. And when we were coming up with these, we were conflicted between the number 1 and number 2 slots between Pelican and Jengu, but we put Jengu first here, and I think both are pretty in line with each other, so...
Well, I think Jengu, kind of like what we said with Piggy, has just been consistent across all heroes. His Winston and Ball have been really good. I think his Reinhardt was his best, but he's been really consistent with everything. And I think that's why, personally, we decided to put him number 1. It's just for that fact.
And yeah, it's really the consistency from these players that really make the teams work well. And that's what I'm liking about all these rookies. They're consistent with their playstyle. They're consistent with their characters. They don't change up stuff a lot. And that really helps have a set team style, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I agree. So that is it for our rookie rankings. I don't know if we'll do that again. Maybe we might at the end of the season. Just something we want to do right now, just to kind of, talk about the rookies, because there's been a lot of really good ones this year. So getting into our final segment of our recap, our week 3 predictions for the June Joust. So I went 3-2 last week. I took a big L on picking the Valiant to beat New York. And then I also picked Dallas to beat the Shock, which I got wrong. I know you went 4-1. So that brings our total on the year so far to 11-4 for each of us, actually. 11 correct picks and 4 incorrect picks. And then just for a reminder, what was your pick from last week that you got wrong?
The one I got wrong for that is I picked Atlanta to win over Los Angeles, and Los Angeles won. So I actually picked the correct score. I put 3-1, but it was it was the other way around. So I mean, I got the score right at least. Does that count for something?
Yeah, I really regret picking the Valiant's win over New York. But with that said, we're both 11-4, so it's dead even here coming into week 3 of the June Joust. And looking at our first game we're going to predict for the upcoming week, we have the Dallas Fuel versus the Florida Mayhem. And I'm going to start with you, Connor. Who did you take for this one?
I'm going to pick Dallas for that. Just given these last 2 weeks, Dallas has played really well. And I'm really liking what they're bringing to the table here with this new meta during these hero band stages. And I think they're being really consistent and they're putting up really good fights. And going against good teams, they're not getting full-on stomps. You know, they're taking points and not complete maps all the time, but they're taking points. So that's something that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, like they lost the Shock, but it's the Shock, and it was still a close game. So I actually picked Florida for this one, but I don't feel good about it. I think really I'm just a Florida simp. I really love Yaki and BQB. I really like OG. I like Slime. Like I really like the roster, and so maybe it's the Florida simp in me. I don't know. I'm really high on this team. I mean, what did we have them in our power rankings? We had them 5th. I think they should be that high. I think most people probably would disagree. So I actually picked Florida. I just think it's a really good roster, and I think Yaki and BQB will fit this meta perfectly. Ash, Widow, Yaki on the Echo. So I think this meta fits them really, really good. And even though obviously Dallas is an extremely strong team, I think Florida should look really good this week. Look at our second game. We have the Chengdu Hunters versus the Hangzhou Spark. I predicted Hangzhou for this one. Look, ever since they put Shy in, they've been dominant, and I don't see why that would change. I know Chengdu is a really good team. They're a team that I have at 6th in our power rankings. In fact, they're higher than Hangzhou in our power rankings, but I think really, those are based off the season as a whole, and I'm looking at right now, I think Hangzhou is looking for a 4-0 stage. I actually think they're going to win both their games this week, including this one, so that's why I picked Hangzhou for this one. Who are you going to take?
So for this one, I actually do not watch East Region games. Sometimes I'll watch them in the replay viewer, but other than that, I really don't watch them, so I just completely guessed this one, and I just put Hangzhou as well, so, I mean, I have no real reason for it, because I don't watch these games, so.
Then you're not going to really like this one either. We'll talk about, actually, I'll go out of order here. We'll talk about the other East Region game we're going to predict then, before we do the last 2 NA games. So we have the Guangzhou Charge versus the Philadelphia Fusion. Who do you want to take on this one?
So even though I don't watch these games, I'm going with Fusion because of the track record they have and how you've said they've been performing. I'm really going off of your own words here to pick this, so don't screw it up for me.
Well, I mean, they've been really bad in this meta, but I just think Guangzhou is so bad. I was actually heavily considering picking the Charge, and then I saw, I think from the time of this video coming out, it would have been like a couple days ago, but the coach for the Guangzhou Charge removed all like the Charge stuff from his Twitter. So I think there's some kind of coaching drama or something going on there. So with that in mind, I did end up picking Philadelphia, even though I think Philadelphia is a really good team this year, and I think they're probably like a top 6-8 team, but they've looked really bad in this meta. So I really wanted to pick the Charge, but there's clearly something going on, and you don't know how that's going to affect the team. So I think there's a good chance with them also playing the Valiant, Philly could go 2-0 this week. So I picked Philadelphia as well. Going back over to the North America side of things, the last 2 matchups we're going to predict with the Boston Uprising versus the LA Gladiators. This one was pretty tough for me. I'm going to let you start, Connor.
For Boston versus Gladiators, I am going with Gladiators. So I made the mistake of choosing Boston for one of our previous team choices here, I guess. And after watching the game, I was like, okay, this was a very bad decision. I screwed up, and then I started watching, Gladiators. I watched 2 Gladiator games. That's about all I've seen, but I'm really impressed by what I'm seeing there.
Was stage 1.
Yes,
it was against Boston. I think it was also against... Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, it was against the Gladiators. It was Boston. So yeah, I think it was the same matchup.
Gladiators. Yeah, it's the same thing. And
yeah,
like there was also another game where who did they play? The other game I watched, I don't remember, but it was also just watching Boston. I'm like, oh my god, why did I do this? This was such a bad mistake. Because remember when I picked that, I said I don't know anything about Boston.
Right.
Oh, then I start watching it. I'm like, Oh, I see.
And they
I
look
see where I
bad
messed
in
up.
stage
Exactly.
one.
Exactly.
But in stage 2, remember, they're 2-0 so far this stage,
Yeah,
including a
but against
3-0
what
beatdown of the
teams?
Washington Justice. I don't
That's a
know.
complete
I don't know
flop.
why I'm defending Boston though, because I picked Gladiators too. So
I mean, I guess I could see what you're talking about for defending a team like Boston, where they were bad last stage and now they're better, and then you have the Justice who were great last stage and now they're bad. So I think it's just the metas that really shake these teams up, where you think a team's going to stay the same as a previous stage, and then there's just this complete flop and change of pace, and players are thrown all over the place because of the different characters that are available, or teams running different heroes, and you really don't know what you're going to get. So I could see why you're defending them.
well,
It's
I'm gonna
kind of
pick
hard
the
to predict.
Gladiators too, because they have looked better in this stage, and I think they've made better coaching decisions and roster decisions. So I'm gonna pick them too. I'm just wanted to point out Boston's look good in this meta. So I think it could be a good game. I almost picked Boston. Looking at the final matchup for the week that we're gonna predict, it's the San Francisco Shock versus the Washington Justice. I believe this is the final game of the week Saturday, and then Sunday's the knockouts. So it could have implications there. I picked the Shock. I mean, look, Washington's looked god awful this stage. In this meta, they don't look like they know what they're doing, which is really weird because they looked bad at Rush in stage 1, so I thought they'd really succeed in this stage, and they just have not. Maybe they'll come out swinging and improved and give the Shock a run for their money, but I wouldn't even be surprised if this is a 3-0 sweep for the Shock. I mean, it really looks like it could be an ugly game, not in the Justice's favor.
I picked the Shock for that as well, because, like you said as well, Washington's been doing completely bad this stage, and Shock is still great. I mean, that game with the fuel, woo, what was that, 5 maps? Especially Anubis. Oh my god, that was those final fights where the teams just kept throwing in ults, coming in, contesting, throwing in ults, contesting, and okay. So this has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now, but it was kind of annoying with all the Echoes and Divas copying each other and throwing bombs in. You would hear nerf this, nerf this, nerf this, back and forth for what was that, like a minute or two straight, because you have like 4 Echo bombs and then 2 Diva bombs coming in after that, and then you'd have more, and it's like, oh my gosh, can this just end? Can you please end my
I think one
suffering?
fight had 5 Diva ults, and I don't think anybody died from them either.
I think there was like one death.
Maybe one, yeah.
One death, yeah. That's about it. But yeah, I mean, Shock's been looking really great. Justice, not so much. Going with Shock for this one.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'm taking the Shock too. I think they look really good. If their DPS show up. If their DPS don't show up, because they have been inconsistent, you might see a close game if Washington has improved since the last time we saw them. So that's our final prediction for the week. I think that's all we have for our weekly recap this week. We're going to start throwing in more things, kind of like what we did this week with the rookie rankings in the middle of it. We're going to start doing more stuff like that every week, mixing it up a little bit. Another really exciting announcement, we actually started putting our episodes, our recaps and our power rankings as podcasts on Apple Podcasts. You can check out the link for that down in the description. We have that up and running. Thank you guys for watching this week. As always, you can like and subscribe, hit the bell icon for notifications, leave a comment, let us know how you like the episode, and enjoy the games this weekend, the Knockouts Sunday, and we'll see you next week for a recap of all the action.